Hello everyone, and again welcome back. So, we are into the last class of week 11, last lecture of week 11, and this week we have been talking about the wastewater reuse and recycling aspect. So, starting from the basic concept of reuse and recycling, and then the various other attributes of reuse and recycling we discussed. This particular class, in the end, we will be talking about the centralized versus decentralized system in the perspective of wastewater recycling. So, we had a very basic discussion on what centralized and what decentralized systems are in the first week of this course. So, we will again quickly have a recap of those, and then we will discuss the recycling and reuse aspects with these systems. So, how these systems are beneficial or they have certain disadvantages in case of if we plan to go for reuse and recycling. So, to begin with, the decentralized management of wastewater is the collection, treatment and reuse of wastewater when it is done either at the point of generation or very near to the point of generation, whereas the centralized systems are the systems where the wastewater is collected from the different sectors, different zones, and then is kind of transported to a central treatment facility. So, like let us say we have, say these are the different places, different areas from where wastewater is being generated. So, we collect all these wastewater and eventually all of these is channelized to just one single point, and then it comes to a STP where this is treated, and after this treatment it usually in the centralized system it is disposed of, or even if it is to be reused. So, then after that it has to be reused, whereas the decentralized system is we break this chain of transporting all these. So, in a smaller clusters, let us say we have one cluster here. So, we can make one STP, smaller STP here itself, we can make one STP here itself, or we can make these clusters combine and make one STP say here, we can combine these cluster and say make one STP here. So, that way we can have various, like we split out this the area, the locality, the region or the entire city into various sub zones, and then we end up kind of collecting, treating and recycling the wastewater within the different zones. So, there are different kind of you see if in the centralized system as well as decentralized system there are various attributes. So, essentially in a centralized system it will consist of a centralized collection system. Okay. So, that is one of the important aspect. It will have a centralized collection system, and for this purpose we need a wide network of sewers. So, there has to be kind of wide network of sewer lines which covers the entire area and somehow collect it to the single treatment system. Okay. Then there needs a centralized wastewater treatment facility. Okay. So, all the sewage or all the wastewater which is collected, when it is channelized to a single point, so that volume becomes quite huge. So, that bulk volume has to be processed or has to be treated in a wastewater treatment facility. So, we need that size of a treatment plant which is your centralized treatment facility, and then we will actually look for or we will go for the various reuse application of the treated effluent or disposal if we want to dispose it off. So, then we will think about the disposing the treated effluent or reusing purpose. So, in a centralized reuse system, if we say that centralized water recycling system, so there would be another component which we discussed in the last class also, that then there has to be again a distribution system which kind of this treated water is further taken to the area of application. So, if the area of application is such that it has to be kind of again redistributed for municipal uses, so then we need a proper distribution system for that wastewater. If it is to be sent to some say agricultural facility, so we can see depending on the land size and water requirements how much this water can fulfill this demand. So, then water needs to be channelized to that treatment facility, that irrigation facility. Okay. So, that are the essential components over there, Now, if you see for the decentralized system, so in decentralized system, since the wastewater is collected, treated or reused at the point which is very close to or which is very near to generation in that way. So, this has been historically common strategy, okay, because when we were under civilization. So, this concept of a sewerage network collecting the entire city's sewage together and then processing in a central facility is relatively much newer concept. Much newer means as in like probably in the beginning of 19th century or so. So, earlier whatsoever the wastewater which was being produced from local scale, village scale, household scale or small town or cities. So, people used to manage that in a generally household scale because there was no centralized collection system. So, making those kind of like device septic tank or putting it through a kind irrigation basin, just draining it off to a field. So, all that was kind of decentralized system because it is not that the entire region's wastewater was being collected together, that was not the case back at that time. The decentralized system can be applied to different scale. Okay, so, the scale of decentralization is very important to what scale we decentralize. The smallest scale is going to be the individual household scale, then we can have actually a cluster of various homes or we can have in a neighborhood, then the public facilities, commercial areas, industrial parks and small portion of the large communities. So, if you are having let us say a big city, so a small portion, a colony in that city or maybe say a cluster of colonies in that city, a market area in that city. So, collect the waste of that particular market area and process it simultaneously. So, that kind of like scale could be there. So, if we see this scale of decentralization, so centralized management essentially is the whole city or the catchment area, okay, that is what we call centralized management, generally whole city because entire catchment area is never possible to tap. Okay. So, essentially if you see like from hydrological perspective, so there is nothing as such centralized systems because it is almost impossible to tap the entire catchment area. So, it becomes like the scale of decentralization, to what scale we decentralize it. So, centralized system is of course centralized system will consider the whole paved area of a city to be processing together, whereas decentralized are smaller system. So, the smallest scale of decentralization is the individual household. So, if individual households are managing their own wastewater or their own sewage at a household level itself. So, that again has been a quite a popular strategy back because people used to go for septic tanks. So, each household used to have septic tanks. So, septic tank is what? It is a basically decentralized treatment facility of the wastewater or the human excreta which is generated. Okay. But then after the kind of development or infrastructural growth and when people moved on towards the centralized system. So, this individual we like got this sewer network laid out across the city and then the individual household level the wastewater management systems, whether it is sustainable or not, that is a different thing. Okay, because we cannot say that septic tank was the best possible solution or was always sustainable. Of course, we have moved from septic tanks to better systems, but that was the probably like in a, if we talk in terms of centralized versus decentralized system. So, that is kind of a smallest scale decentralized system where we have a treatment mechanism, treatment facility at a household level. Okay. Then from there we went to centralized system, and again we are now talking about more communication or more emphasis is being given to the decentralized system, but decentralized system now which is being kind of promoted is not to a smallest scale, but somewhere a little larger decentralized systems or medium scale decentralized system. So, at just we are saying that we can decentralize it at various levels at a various scale. So, that way like the medium scale some locality or regional basis decentralization is the one which is being more kind of favored these days. So, which one is the more kind of sustainable, whether a large scale decentralized system versus small scale decentralized system. So, they both have their own advantages and disadvantages, okay. But from financial aspect or environmental aspects, it is not always preferable to go for the very large system, or it is not at the same time preferable to go for individual household level systems or that small level systems, because then the cost aspects, management aspects, those things are going to come into the picture. So, if we see how these decentralized treatment and reuse systems tend to achieve the goal of treatment and recycling. So, decentralized systems will have kind of availability of many cases and specific technologies, okay, that is going to be there. There is a possibility of gradual development and investments, like in centralized systems. If you want to build a treatment plant for say 200 MLD, 200 million liter per day, 500 million liter per day. So, you will have to design it at once, plan it at once, and probably there is some possibility of phase wise construction for few units if you are planning that way, but otherwise majority of the units construction installation has to be done at one instance, okay. So, there is not enough scope of going for gradual development, whereas in a decentralized system, because these are smaller units, okay. So, you can take phase wise areas and go on building up this thing. So, you can basically control your investment in a phase wise manner, okay, or you can gradually develop the decentralized systems which spread over a wide area of the city, okay. And no use of water as a transport medium, that is another thing, because we will not in decentralized system the transportation cost is substantially reduced. So, these, like when we say the availability of many case specific technologies, so this helps in protecting public health. Gradual investments meets the aspect of increasing demand or increasing production at the smaller scale, and reducing pressure from scarce water resources will be achieved if by kind of reusing or utilizing that water. So, if we see the different features of centralized versus decentralized system, okay, from reuse perspective. So, first thing, like there are several aspects, okay, we will have to check, evaluate and analyze these systems, the proposed systems, whether it is centralized or decentralized, which one is beneficial in what terms over all these multiple aspects. So, for say physical aspect, we will see the volume of wastewater generated. So, how much volume of the wastewater is being generated from a city. Now, if it is a say very large city and you want to go for a centralized system, if you end up generating 1000 million liters of water per day. So, how you are going to collect that 1000 million liters of water per day, where you are going to process it, okay, whether there is any site available for that like that large or that big a size available for processing this much of wastewater, what you are going to do with that wastewater post those things. So, that will come into the picture. So, that volume of the wastewater being generated, the availability of size, the availability of specific site where this can be put through. It is basically not just in the terms of centralized, in terms of decentralized also, because if say the 1000 MLDs, if you want to say break down to into 10 MLDs 100 treatment plants. So, you will have to find the 100 sites across that city, okay. So, are there 100 available 100 locations available to process it that way, or if you want to go even smaller 1 MLD. So, are there 1000 locations available to process that water, okay. So, that site availability is a issue in both the sense. In a centralized systems, we need one much larger site. In a decentralized system, we need although smaller size, but in several numbers, okay. So, whether there are like those kind of sites available. So, which one is available, that could be a decision making tool in here. Then feasibility of transport systems. If you are going to lay out a network for collecting all like collecting the sewage from this entirely spread city, that much of volume of sewage is to be processed, what is going to be the diameter of those sewer lines, okay. So, if you are let us say willing to install sewer pipes which can carry towards the treatment plant, which can carry 1000 million liters per day of flow. So, what can you imagine what is going to be the size of that? So, where to lay that network, how to process those pipe networks, is it feasible or not feasible? So, that has to be kind of evaluated, that has to be seen, okay, as opposed to the decentralized system. So, whether there are that many sites available, and then because in the decentralized system the transport part is very minimum, okay, because it is a on site management. So, within a from say locality or within that small market area, it becomes far more easy to have a sewer system, a small sewer system bringing the water to the treatment facility. Then there are technical aspects. So, treatment technologies available and their suitability. So, there are various treatment technologies which are suitable for only small scale system. There are several technologies which are more suitable for large scale systems. So, we have basically different technologies available, and the selection of those technologies based on these technical aspects. So, what kind of efficiency is needed, okay. Then adaptation and piloting of newer technology, how feasible it is. So, if you are having a centralized systems, it becomes very difficult to adopt new technology. If particularly with an existing system, if you want to amend something, it becomes very difficult because of the scale. If you are having a 1000 MLD plant, and if you just want to see if adding one unit is going to help or not, it becomes very difficult there. But in a smaller systems, it is fairly easy, okay. You will the sizes of unit are much smaller. So, kind of mending your treatment philosophy or kind of revising your this treatment scheme is fairly possible, fairly easy in the decentralized system. Then sludge handling feasibilities. Now, in centralized systems we have we do generate lot of sludge, for which we need again the sludge handling area or those kind of thing, which is kind of a part of your treatment facility. But in decentralized systems, if you end up generating sludge at a various different locations, what you are going to do with the sludge, how you are going to deal with the sludge, okay. In centralized facilities it is together. So, processing the sludge, centrifuging it, dewatering it, and then if you want to say reuse or dispose it off from one point, it is relatively easier. But in decentralized systems, if you are adopting a treatment processes which generate lot of sludge, what you are going to do with that sludge in a local scale, okay. So, if there are uses for that, it becomes preferable. If there are no uses for that, it becomes a burden of disposing that sludge or handling that sludge in a several small units, say in 100 small units of 10 MLD as opposed to 1000 MLD unit, treatment unit, okay. Then operation and maintenance of the installed system, that is another very important aspect, okay, because if we see the like in a centralized systems, we can have a devoted team which takes care of, which looks after the operation and maintenance of the plant in a particular manner in a, okay. But if you are going to split it, so if you are say having 1000 plants of 1 MLD or 100 plants of 10 MLD instead of one of say 1000 MLD, so how much amount of manpower is needed for handling those 100 units or 1000 units, okay, and whether they are skilled or not. So, that operation and maintenance becomes a tricky task, particularly in a smaller system. It might be actually easy technologically, but the requirement of the manpower increases many folds, okay. So, you will have to take care of the plant, you will have to take care of the kind of plant operation, its maintenance, its securities. The technologies could be different. So, some technologies are like low end maintenance technologies. So, like if you are adopting a simple natural processes, a wetland kind of thing which does not require much of the treatment, okay, or simple process which does not need much of the like skilled operation and maintenance. So, one can actually just adopt those technologies and then use water possibly for irrigation or horticulture purpose if it is permit, if the water quality is of that sort. But for reusing with other aspects, if you want to go for a higher end treatment, so particularly the advanced treatment at decentralized scales are going to be a big challenge, okay. But then again there is a flexibility that with some units, depending on the kind of reuse potential available, some units may go for high end treatment, while some other units may just like go for a minimal treatment for the desired or targeted reuse option. Then there are financial aspects in terms of like the total cost of the centralized and decentralized solution. So, what is going to be the total cost of centralized and decentralized solution? So, in a decentralized solution we may see that individual units cost is very less, but the what is going to be the total cost, okay. Because if you cumulative say the cost of those 100 treatment facilities as opposed to just one big treatment facility, how much cost effective that one big facility is going to be, or how much cost effective these small 100 treatment facilities is going to be. So, again that depends on the scale of decentralization, okay, because if you are going for say household level treatment, we may see that it may prove to be more costly as opposed to one centralized system, okay. However, if we go for some intermediate scale, we may see that it is more economic as opposed to centralized system, because it is not just the cost of treatment plant, it is the cost of transportation which is too high in centralized system, which is almost very little in decentralized system. So, if you have to transport that water, you have to lay down a pipe network, you have to pump, put the pumping stations, manholes, then arrange kind of the entire sewer network throughout the city, carrying those big sewer pipes. So, the chances of failures, managing set of distances, all those becomes quite a like costly affairs, okay, in centralized systems, where in decentralized systems the cost of transportation is very minimal, but having so many treatment plants at different locations might in collective or in the combined cost might actually be like, it has to be seen, it has to be properly evaluated that which option is more cost effective in terms of the overall solution. And then if let us say decentralized systems, again as we said that there are various option or various scale of decentralized. If we see that okay, household scale decentralized is not going to be effective, then what scale of decentralized is going to be cost effective. Then other aspect is the possibility of phase wise development, as we were just talking, that it is very difficult with the centralized systems and far more easy with the decentralized systems. We need to see what are the payback periods of the investment in a centralized system or in a decentralized system. Then there are energy aspect in terms of like combined energy footprint of various treatment systems, the energy required for off-site transport to wastewater and distribution of the reclaimed water. So, all those needs to be properly seen. Further, there are end use aspects. So, scale of the end use alternatives, whether we want end use to be at a localized scale or to a centralized scale. If your end use is going to be on a centralized scale, let us say for example in the Singapore. So, the new water which kind of treats the sewage and then augment its domestic water supplies. So, what happens that it is actually, since augmenting the domestic water supply, so it is a kind of centralized scale end use. From there onwards it is going to the your different, eventually like in the different section, different parts of the city along with your wastewater, along with your water supply network, okay. So, if you are end up going for a decentralized wastewater treatment facilities, so again after treating you have to transport that water to the centralized facility from where you are going to resupply that water. So, there not much of transportation cost is saved if your end use option is again a centralized one. But if your end use option is decentralized one, let us say irrigating, horticulturing, okay, gardening, flowering. So, these are very local type of end use. The water is being treated here and you can basically put that in the vicinity for the purpose of gardening, for the purpose of watering the plants, those kind of things. So, these are like a kind of very localized end use option of the reclaimed water. So, if those kind of options are to be preferred, are to be basically opted, then the decentralized systems are going to be better, whereas if you are going for a centralized end use system, so then even if you go for decentralized treatment, you will need the transport for the point of use. So, that way it is not going to be helpful in any way. Then there are various social aspects. So, proximity to the human settlements, okay, because your centralized systems are generally off-site management. So, it is taken, the water is transported at some far off facility, and from there it passes through sewer lines. So, those things are there, and if your sewer lines are not protected, you end up exposing a lot of health risk over there, but if your sewer lines are protected, that is not much of a concern. So, there is not going to be kind of social objection to those systems, but in a decentralized system we will have to have plants in the vicinity of the place where the wastewater is being generated primarily. So, there because of the decentralized scale and because of the several plants across the city or across the kind of territory, we may have issues in terms of like public acceptability, that if there is a human settlement and there might be objection that you cannot make a wastewater treatment facility here, because there would be health risk associated with that. Okay. So, there is going to be order issues, overflow issues. If your sewerage is, let us say, overflowing, then aesthetic issues, all those things may create kind of issues with the public perception and public acceptability. And then willingness to pay can also be like, if I am getting say reused water for processing here itself. So, those factors eventually affect the willingness to pay as well. Okay. So, those are various social aspects. Then there are environmental aspects. So, environmental impact of the centralized and decentralized system, then energy footprint, the net climate change impact, what is the net water productivity from these centralized and decentralized systems. So, all these has to be seen, and environmentally most sustainable option could be kind of figured out based on these criteria, their impact assessments, their energy footprints, their climate change impact assessments. So, all those things has to be kind of evaluated while going for selection whether of the centralized versus decentralized system. Then there are institutional aspect. So, the institutional and organizational capacity to manage the so many number of treatment plants or a large size of treatment plant, okay, the security of the plant, okay, from the theft and vandalism. So, those kind of aspects may also come into the picture, because as we were just saying that if you are having say 100 number of smaller treatment plants, so are there like technical skills available to operate and manage those systems? There needs a security from ensuring the like these plants are safe from theft and vandalism kind of things. While centralized systems, it comes a size, though if let us say is it feasible technologically, or you have institutional or organizational capacity to run, construct and operate a plant of that bigger size, 1000 MLD of size. So, if not, and if it is, so if you want to decentralize it, to what scale you have the institutional capacity to manage. So, those are the some of the kind of aspects which needs to be seen while evaluating these. So, if we see the management of decentralized wastewater system, the operation and maintenance of these on-site system is usually left to the homeowners or local groups, okay. And there may be a problem because like if the maintenance is not proper, so this system may fail. That is why it is kind of, some people recommend that we should develop policies, programs and guidelines as well as institutional capacities to ensure the proper design, construction, operation, maintenance of these decentralized wastewater treatment system as well. Okay. And these management system should address several points, okay, like funding, the public involvement and their awareness, the system design and selection processes, the inspection, monitoring programs and evaluation of these decentralized facilities. So, some people in fact recommend that there could be a centralized governance for the decentralized wastewater treatment systems as well. So, that strategy is being recommended by some, that even though there could be like one could this city or utility can go for decentralized treatment facilities, decentralized treatment and recycling options, but it should be inspected, maintained and monitored from a kind of more comprehensive way, and there has to be centralized governance at least for inspection purpose, that these utilities are functioning in a proper manner. So, if we look at the various advantages and disadvantages of these central systems. So, the decentralized system, that which is the advantage for decentralized system is obvious disadvantages for centralized one, and the disadvantages of decentralized systems are relative advantage for the centralized system that way. So, if we see the decentralized systems does not require the large investment and usually more affordable for smaller communities. So, that is one point where they score more over the centralized system. Further, if needed, we can we can achieve the higher removal rates for most of the pollutants, because it is a small scale. So, if let us say you want to use that for industrial processes, and from a decentralized systems, it is far easy to kind of then treat that water to a level of ion exchange or RO system and use it. But going for that high end or advanced treatment system for a centralized solution is going to be immensely costly. Okay. You can, if you plan to use RO say for a 1 MLD plant versus you plan to use a RO for a 1000 MLD plant, you can see the kind of infrastructure investment, initial investment and operation and maintenance cost would be needed for that. Okay. Same way, if needed, if desired, the low energy and maintenance system could also be installed. So, like in place of conventional centralized treatment facility where we go for activated sludge process which uses a lot of energy, we can go for low energy and low maintenance system in the form of say wetlands or anaerobic processes or other systems where their energy requirement is low, if our reuse quality criteria permits that. Okay. Further, there is going to be less hydrological impact, as you are going to avoid this long distance transport. Okay, and you are also going to avoid the big sewer networks. So, that way the hydrological impacts are less. For local scale recycling, these are highly preferable system. They are considered relatively green and sustainable solution, and they can be integrated into a flexible wastewater system. So, we can get a flexibility of reusing the water to different scale, different types, different grades of water can be produced. So, all those flexibility is there. Whereas, in the disadvantages front, if we see, so treatment efficiency of some unit may not be good enough. Okay. So, that is the problem, because of that could be because of operation and maintenance issues, or could be because of the kind of technology which has been adopted. Further, it can be harder to document the treatment effectiveness, because there are so many small number of facilities, so many large number of smaller facilities. So, how you are going to monitor, document those things. So, if you say want to analyze the treatment effectiveness in a centralized treatment systems, you can grab some sample from inflow, some sample from outflow, and you are done. But in a smaller treatment facility, instead of one, if you have 100 treatment plants and you are say want to analyze samples in duplicate inflow and outflow. So, just 4 samples are going to be good enough, 2 from inflow and 2 from outflow from a centralized treatment facility, but with 100 smaller treatment plants you will need 400 samples, 2 from each inflow and 2 from each outflow. So, instead of 4 you have to analyze 400 samples. So, that kind of like it becomes very difficult to analyze that and document the treatment effectiveness of these so many treatment facilities. Further, risk of failure of some units would be there, as it is difficult to properly maintain the large number of units as we have been discussing. The O&M also could become an additional burden to the owner, okay, in the smaller treatment plants, and there is could be higher risk of public health issues because of the large number of these facilities. So, that could be some of the kind of issues, advantages and disadvantages associated with decentralized treatment systems. So, if we see the recent trends, what is being kind of getting more popularized, or what is in practice these days. So, the government are kind of enforcing reuse guidelines as well as encouraging users to go for the reuse and recycling purpose. Okay. in the form of various incentives. So, like and that is what making private residential and commercial units opting for the decentralized sewage treatment and recycling facilities. So, that way there are various kind of apartments in all major cities you will see, like in Delhi, Gurgaon, Bombay, everywhere. So, what is done that these now housing complex level or block level, they come up with a treatment facility. These treatment facilities are mostly kind of packaged sewage treatment units. Okay. So, the complex will buy a packaged sewage treatment plant and they treat that sewage through that and then recycle that or reuse that reclaimed water for gardening, street washing and other such issues. Okay. Now, the point here is that this is done again because of the probably enforcement of reuse guidelines or encouragement options. So, many places the government or state bodies or the the city authorities are forcing the complex owners to go for these facilities, and at many places these are being encouraged by kind of announcing certain incentives. So, in the form of say certain rebates in the tax or FAR, those kind of things, okay, rebates are offered, and that is how the complex owners or those people eventually go for opting for these facilities. Okay. In the industrial sector, the Central Pollution Control Board is enforcing the industries to adopt zero liquid discharge policies. Okay. And that is how forcing industries to treat and fully recycle their effluent. So, the concept of CETPs, combined effluent treatment plants, where the industries kind of put their different effluents to just one treatment, single treatment unit which can treat it and then dispose it off, is being discouraged these days. Okay. So, the disposal of the waste from the industry or sending it to the combined effluent treatment plant, which is a kind of centralized system, of course, within the industrial peripheries. So, those things are being discouraged, and the government is kind of enforcing industries to go for zero liquid discharge policies, where they fully treat and recycle their waste within their own territory. So, overall there is kind of relative ease in reusing and recycling the reclaimed water when we go for decentralized systems as opposed to the centralized systems, and this is what is making decentralized systems more popular than conventional centralized wastewater treatment practices. However, at the same time we have to see the other aspect that decentralized is fine, but what is going to be the appropriate scale of decentralization. So, it is not that decentralization at very specific or very fine scale is recommended, but yes, instead of going for a big centralized systems, it is being practiced and it is being perceived the better solution to go for suitable scale decentralized treatment options. So, that is what was kind of the summary of the discussions we and next week we will conclude this week's lecture, this week's discussions here, and next week we are going to talk about various other aspects related to the reuse and recycling of the wastewater in terms of say decision making and the public involvement in such process, role of public perception and role of public participation in such systems. So, those things we are going to talk in the next and final week of this course. So, thank you for joining and see you in next week, which would be the last week for this course. Thank you.